It's just stock Pontiac stuff. Welcome back to the laboratory. Today I'm going to do things a little bit differently. First, instead of asking / begging you to like, comment, share, and subscribe at the end of the video, I'm going to do it now, at the beginning of the video. So hit the button down there. And I want to quickly comment on the comments part. YouTube is full of all kinds of great advice and great information, but not all of the information is always good. Now, I'm not going to pretend that I'm an expert at everything. I am not. I'm just a simple country engineer. So if you see me doing something or saying something that's wrong, let me know in the comments. Just be respectful and try not to confuse fact and opinion. You can learn something from anyone, so let's learn from each other. The day that you don't learn anything new is the day that you're dead. But I'm not a doctor. So if you didn't learn anything new today, you might want to check with yours. Other things we're doing differently in this video is we're going back in time to when I was building the GTO engine, the one that's in there now. I didn't videotape any of that, but I did take lots of pictures because at the time I was writing for High Performance Pontiac magazine, well, among others. Unfortunately, that magazine got axed right when I was doing a ton of work on the GTO, and as a result, a bunch of the articles I was working on never hit print. So, this video will mostly be a narrated picture show about how I disguised Edelbrock heads to look like stock Pontiac heads. So, let's get after it. Pontiac heads are identified by the casting numbers on the center exhaust ports. For a 66 GTO, the correct original heads would have a 093 cast on the ports. Pontiac heads also came in two configurations, D-port and round port. The port difference refers to the shape of the center exhaust ports. Standard Pontiac heads have smaller D-shaped exhaust ports. The 455 Super Duty, 455 HO, Ram Air 2, and the Ram Air 4 heads had the bigger, rounder ports. Aftermarket Pontiac heads come in both configurations, but trying to disguise a round port head as a D-port head would be a real challenge since the ports in the middle of the head are much wider on the round port heads. So I chose to go with the Edelbrock Aluminum D-port heads. Besides the major weight savings, they have a modern fast burn chamber, and that's key to running the high compression that I run with pump gas in the GTO. Telltale visual differences on the Edelbrock heads, besides the Edelbrock cast on the exhaust ports where the 093 needs to be, are the ends of the heads. The stock heads have core plugs and raw cast areas, while the Edelbrock heads are fully machined, have no core plugs, and have more Edelbrock stuff engraved on the ends of the heads. If I had a milling machine, I could have modified the Edelbrock heads to install actual core plugs, but with my available equipment, I could only fake the core plugs too. The first order of business was to grind off the Edelbrock logo cast onto the exhaust ports. That was quick and simple with a coarse carbide and die grinder. To fix the texture after grinding, I used a needle scaler attachment on my pneumatic hammer. The aluminum castings in general have a smoother texture than sand cast iron, so I used a needle scaler to rough up all the cast surfaces on the aluminum heads. The next challenge was to create the proper casting letters and numbers. On the 093 heads, the casting date is under the valve cover, so I didn't need to worry about that. The 093 heads were also the first Pontiac heads to integrate air injection, so there's a gallery cast right into the heads, clearly visible along the outside of the head. Since the Edelbrock heads didn't have the gallery, a hardcore Pontiacer would recognize these weren't real 093 heads, so I decided to create an X93 casting code with the X for export, hence the reason for no air injection provisions. Of course it's all made up, but I figured it might fool some people. Since the casting code ends up on the hot exhaust ports, I needed to do some testing to find something that would hold up under those temperatures. I created some test letters on some 1/8 aluminum coupons using various compounds. Then I put a propane torch to the back and I heated it until I saw temperatures similar to what I measured on actual engines. The infrared thermometer in that picture is reading in Celsius, by the way. Turned out the high heat JB Weld putty worked flawlessly, so that's what I used to create the casting codes. The other JB Weld on the right will come into the plan a bit later. I rolled the high heat JB Weld putty into thin strips, then arranged them into numbers and letters as needed. With the correct metallic Pontiac blue over the top, the fake casting codes looked pretty legit. The next challenge was addressing the appearance of the front of the heads. I needed to fake the core plugs, add in the raw cast areas, and eliminate the Edelbrock engravings. To get the shapes and locations right, I created a pattern from one of my 093 heads using CAD, cardboard aided design, with part of an old frozen pizza box. I created a pattern that would be located by the accessory mounting holes on the heads, as those should be in the same position on the Edelbrock heads as the original Pontiac heads. With studs screwed into the heads and a heavy coat of wet paint, I pressed the cardboard against the head to get the pattern I needed. I then attached the cardboard to a 1-inch thick piece of plywood and trimmed it out with an X-Acto knife as needed to transfer the pattern to the wood. Using a drill gauge as a template, I could center punch locations for drilling the holes and for the radii. Then it was off to the drill press. I used a hole saw for the fake core plug. For the locating holes, I countersunk them so I could use flush mounting hardware. Then a jigsaw and some filing and sanding finished out the template. With the template mounted up to the stock 093 head, you can see what I was working towards. To create the raw cast areas, I'd use a 1/4-inch end mill mounted in a router and route out those areas. The plywood template was thick enough that the shoulder of the end mill would ride on the wood without fear of cutting into it. To get the cut depth correct, I measured the depth of the cast areas on the 093 heads with a caliper, then set up the router accordingly. Then I clamped the Edelbrock head onto my workmate, attached the template, made some initial test cuts, then got to routering out the whole areas. To get rid of the machining marks, I again went back to the needle scaler to rough up the cast areas. For the core plug area, I buzzed it with a Rolox disc to get the smooth look of a core plug. In the end, I was impressed how well it turned out. The next thing to address was the leftover engravings on the front of the heads. That's where the other JB weld came in. I just mixed it up and slopped it on like it was body filler. After it hardened up, and it was hard, some filing and sanding made it smooth again after a whole lot of work. By the way, I didn't put any efforts into the back of the heads since they're right up tight against the firewall so nobody would see them. The last item to address was the valve cover clearance. Original 66 GTO heads used the shallow, earlier style valve covers with the pent roof on the end, like you see on the left. The later style, like on the right, are taller, so Pontiac lowered the valve cover rails on the heads to save some weight. Problem is, the early valve covers on the later heads will result in rocker arm clearance problems. To address that, I glued a 3/16" spacer on the valve cover rails before painting the heads, so you can hardly notice it's there, but now my Crowler stainless steel roller rockers clear fine. After throwing the first coat of Pontiac metallic blue paint on, the final coats were applied when the whole engine was assembled. It turned out great. Without looking really hard, it looks like a stock 66 GTO 389. So, there you have it. My secret is out. Well, one of them. Thanks for watching. See you on the next one. And you know what? Be kind. Lots of people out there right now are having a rough time, so let's all be nice. I then attached the cardboard third time. Yeah, let's just delete that and start over.